is a Wood TV 8 special presentation. Weathering West Michigan. Storms that shaped us.
Thank you for joining us. I'm meteorologist Sarah Flynn.
And I'm Blake Harms. Over the next half hour, we are going back in time to three of the most impactful weather events here in West Michigan over the past 50 years.
These include the blizzard of 1978, the Kalamazoo tornado of 1980, and the derecho of 1998. All are events that have been defining moments in the last half century.
Tonight, we will hear from some of those who were on the front lines of covering those storms from the moment they happened.
We begin tonight with the snowstorm of all snowstorms, the blizzard of 1978.
Blizzard of 78. That was an amazing event.
The blizzard of 78 was very memorable for me. Like a lot of aspiring meteorologists, severe weather, thunderstorms, tornadoes, blizzards are really what interest you most.
They say they are ready to arrest anyone driving a car without a good reason. It is that serious an emergency. Henry Erb, News Center 8.
That was the best part of semi-retirement, is not having to go out and get snow in your face at 50 miles an hour.
There were two separate storm systems. There was one that was going across the southern United States and coming up into the northeast. The second one was coming down from the northwest, and they were timed just perfectly. Everything came together. These two systems merged.
Well, in a completely meteorological sense, the fact that it got down to 950 millibars, which is the all-time record lowest pressure for a non-tropical storm over North America.
People can prepare, they can sort of hunker down and make sure that their household is stocked with whatever they need and, you know, be prepared maybe to stay in if they have to.
By early afternoon, almost all of the News Center 8 viewing area was under a state of emergency.
I remember the forecast and talking about it, and also being snowed in for 4 days at my house, and I lived way on the west side. And nobody predicted that it would be, what, 19, almost 20 inches of snow, and how long it would last, because typically a storm would be 12 to 24 hours maybe. And this was a 48-hour event, and it just kept snowing, and it kept piling up. And at first you thought, this is really cool.
Grand Rapids, we had 15 inches of snow in 15 hours, along with 42-mile-an-hour wind gusts.
Just settle in.
Settle in.
You know.
Let the snow accumulate and worry about digging it out later.
We called the snow removal service, and they said they can't get in. And it was a choice of either walking or shoveling.
This is all cozy, and we'll have snow, and then I'll drive into work tomorrow. And not a chance. And nobody moved. Everything was just shut down.
I walked out that Wednesday morning. I was going to get to work really early. I walked out of my apartment, and there was a drift up to the top of the window on the side of my car. And I'm like, well, I'm not going anywhere. Now what do I do? I actually walked into work, and I got picked up by a policeman who saw me walking down the middle of Alpine Avenue.
Officials from 6 of the hospitals in Grand Rapids put out the request late this morning for people with four-wheel drive vehicles to help get hospital employees to work.
We were using four-wheel drive vehicles, and so we were able to get out in it and do some work. But from my perspective, it was a lot like other storms. I mean, it's Michigan, it's winter, and it was miserable.
Snowmobiles played a major role in emergencies, transporting stranded people and food and medicine. State police asked snowmobilers to check for stranded drivers on clogged back roads. A lot of snowmobilers just mounted up to volunteer their help.
One of my neighbors, we were so snowed in, was Jerry Helmholtz, who became mayor of Grand Rapids. He was down the street, and you couldn't go anywhere, so he had a snowmobile. So he would get a snowmobile and go to all the neighbors and take food orders and go to the Kroger store, which was on Lake Michigan Drive, get food and come back and deliver it to people.
Oh, I'd pick up one guy over off of Richmond Street, and I just took him home, you know. His cars and stuff, it's unbelievable.
What have you seen out there this morning?
Just everybody stranded. His car's stuck all over.
What are you going to do now?
Just take off, head down the expressway, I guess. See what's down that way.
It was 2 weeks before the schools reopened. 2 weeks. And, you know, I stood on a snowdrift that was 14 feet high around Wayland, where the snow had funneled in through the overpass. I believe to get all of US 131 open from Big Rapids on down to the Indiana border, it took 5 days.
Coming up on Weathering West Michigan.
School is still in session, and here's a tornado that's hitting at 4:25 in the afternoon. I remember the day well. I got up in the morning and I looked at all the weather maps.
I grew up on the west side of Kalamazoo in the Westwood neighborhood on Northampton Street and right at West Main. My mom had taken me to her friend's house and she had a number of little kids my age and we were all playing. But what I remember about that day the most is the adults and how their whole demeanor changed when the storm was coming and when the storm had blown through.
May 13th, second week of May, school is still in session, and here's a tornado that's hitting at 4:25 in the afternoon.
They had a watch out and a warning out, about 10-minute lead time before that tornado hit Kalamazoo.
I saw it touch down because I saw debris starting to fly up in the air.
It was devastating for Kalamazoo.
I mean, this was an F3 tornado. Now we have EF, but this was a time when we had an F3 tornado.
A killer tornado trampled 9 miles through the heart of Kalamazoo. It started on the western edge of town, a residential section of Kalamazoo Township, and it was on collision course with Kalamazoo's pride and joy, the downtown.
There were 5 fatalities and 79 injured, and most of them were in the downtown area. The entire wall, west wall of Gilmore's department store caved in, where you see the individual floors.
I just turned around and saw one of our office girls back here and glass all over the place, in the air. I was just kind of standing there going, what in the world is happening here?
When my mom was able to get a hold of my dad and he was able to drive back home, he was stopped at the road at West Main Street at Northampton by the National Guard that had moved in to block all the roads so that the cleanup could begin. And so he had to convince them, no, I live down there. I live in one of those houses. Please let me in.
When the all clear sounded, an entire city had a look of disbelief etched on its face. Everybody in the stricken area was, to some degree, in shock. There were tears and hugs. I helped one lady huddled in a stairway, unable to speak.
It's just 2 doors down. I have my friend's house. Their house was damaged so badly it had to be torn down. And in the pictures, her dad had a sense of humor. He put house for sale, cheap, air conditioning, a handyman's dream. So it was like that as it was boarded up until they tore it down and rebuilt it.
There were $50 million damage in Kalamazoo County, and that is in 1980 dollars. So you can imagine that would be, 4 or 5 times that today.
And I believe we had about 20 minutes lead time with the Portage tornado. So that kind of gives you a sense of how things evolved over the decades.
Even at that young age, it gave me some empathy in covering news. When people go through tragedies, when people go through loss, I can remember how scary that day was, how unsettling it was, and I hope that's made me a more empathetic reporter to understand the things that people can go through in West Michigan.
Coming up on Weathering West Michigan.
And I look at things and I go, holy smokes, we're going to get creamed.
North and west of Grand Rapids. When you look at the radar imagery from that night, it was like somebody cracked a whip through the atmosphere.
I found out a couple months earlier that I was hired by Storm Team 8, so super excited. And the day I was supposed to start training was that day.
We tried to do the best we could to put the messages out that we could. We had no idea we were going to have 130-mile-an-hour winds that was going to do the damage that it did.
I drive into the station, and I look at things and I go, holy smokes, we're going to get creamed.
They woke me up and I got out of bed, and I realized we had a strong wind. And about 2 seconds later, I heard glass crashing.
The storm came through, and it got blustery for a while, and it was nothing. And then the phone rang.
Being awakened very early in the morning by the then assistant news director, Tim Dye, who was like, get up, we're going full Battle Station. I'm like, what? And I was groggy. I was like, I'm going to Battle Creek?
I remember the storm coming through. I looked out the window. We had a 100-foot-tall pine tree that was absolutely bowing.
So above 90 miles an hour, you start to get that exponential increase in force. So you start to see almost all the trees go down once you get above 90 to 95 miles an hour.
You can see the power flashes, the choo, 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 just like you see with the tornado, only this is a much broader area. I mean, there were flashes everywhere. And you could hear the noise of the wind, which was, it just gave you chills.
Got down to Riverside Park, and every other tree big, old-growth trees, knocked down. Looked like a movie set. Looked like something had roared through there and just indiscriminately knocked these huge trees down. And then I found I couldn't even get down Monroe because there was so much debris blocking the road.
It was pretty amazing, pretty devastating. Even driving down Monroe felt like you were out on a two-track having to dodge the trees.
Hogenberg was sitting in his living room when the storm came through.
Everybody in the news business kind of reacts to that sort of thing. You don't generally have to call people in. They know. It was one of those situations.
All of the news crews that were out covering it just kept calling back to the station, and they just kept saying, I cannot believe what I'm seeing.
Finally made it up to Alpine Avenue, and the old Keller Ford was right there by the apartment buildings off of Alpine, and that's when we started doing live shots. And the damage was amazing.
This storm broke the tops off a lot of evergreens.
So I was assigned to go to Muskegon and report on damage on the lakeshore. And on the way, we stopped by Walker, where it was, I had never seen that kind of storm damage around here before. It was really a mess.
We used to go out to Grand Haven quite often, and that was where some of the worst damage occurred. Straight line wind damage that ended up estimated at 130 miles an hour, which, if you think about it on the EF tornado scale, is a high-end EF2 tornado.
It was Memorial Day weekend, so you had a ton of campers out there, and you've seen the video. They're just tossed around like matchbox cars. It's a mess out there.
It was terrible. It's terrible. I never want to go through that again. I wanted to go home last night. I wanted to go home.
The condo complex that collapsed at the waterfront there.
As Rick and his crew get ready to go to their next location, they know they may have as many as 10 more hours ahead of them.
I can remember the first thing that you noticed, that whenever you stopped the car, all you could hear was chainsaws everywhere. People cutting up down trees. And of course there were lines, and all of that work was going on too.
It was a 5 or 6 day event, because the next couple of days you had all the crews trying to evaluate all the damage. And here again, it was so widespread, you had to be all over the place.
The sooner I can get involved, our office can kind of get the people in Washington hooked into it. Usually it makes it a little easier to get that federal assistance.
I think a lot of times when politicians come in after a storm like this, the more they stay out of the way, I think it serves them and the people best. The thing that you can do best as a politician is go back to the Capitol and start getting some money moving in that direction.
After the calendar year 1998 was over, the National Weather Service concluded that that was the strongest, biggest thunderstorm complex, not in the Midwest, not in the United States, not in North America, but the entire world, and went right through West Michigan.
It looked like images you see of the Gulf Coast after a hurricane. Remarkable.
But the only generator not going out the door at the Alpine rental store was the one powering the lights and cash register.
All of our generators are rented out. We've also gotten a load of about 15 in this morning, and they're all sold out already.
It took at least 10 days to get the power back on. So you can imagine 10 days without power. That means a lot of schools didn't have power, which meant a lot of schools, they were done for the year.
I actually always get more nervous for the derecho days, the days that we could potentially see another derecho system again, because the impact is just so much larger.
But that was an eye-opener from the fact that generally you're worried about tornadoes, but to see that straight line wind come in and see what that kind of damage that could do, and again, how widespread it was, that was a new perspective.
Coming up on Weathering West Michigan.
I think people are noticing that the forecasts are getting more accurate. They truly are.
Throughout those 3 major weather events in the past half-century, we have also witnessed the evolution of forecasting and the technology that goes along with it.
Who better to hear it from than those who use it every day to keep West Michigan safe?
Predictability is much greater. Our numerical models that meteorologists use to help refine the forecast are much more sophisticated than they were in 1978.
It was weather presenting because meteorologists were at the weather NOAA or someplace, but they weren't on television, and it was evolving then.
And once you had your forecast, all you had to do was go out and draw the state map and the national map. Took you 10 minutes.
Back then, we literally drew on maps and showed where the cold fronts and warm fronts and stationary fronts were going to be. I would draw happy, smiley, sunny faces for sunny days.
As we can see on Weather Track radar.
Technology obviously has changed over the years. I think that we're able to forecast a lot of these storms farther out. We have an indication that they're coming sooner.
Instead of having this big, broad, well, it might be here and it might be here, you can look at a storm and see where the dangerous part is or the potentially dangerous part.
I remember looking at the radar and watching Bill Steffen and thinking, that does not look very impressive on the radar. Because at that point we had greens, yellows, oranges, and reds. That was it. Now, with our radar, we can slice, dice it.
Conventional weather radars were fine, but they just allowed us to see where precipitation, snow, hail was and its intensity. What the Doppler radar allowed us to do was to not only see where the precipitation is, but also whether motion of that precipitation is toward us or away from us.
So now that we have just so much more in terms of observations with radar and satellite data, and our supercomputers have undergone so many updates, it can crunch so much data.
The supercomputers in Bethesda, Maryland, where they're located, can calculate 1 million billion calculations per second to derive all those, atmospheric equations and spit out the model data that we look at.
I think people are noticing that the forecasts are getting more accurate. They truly are.
I recall a time when one of our former news directors came up to us and we did a 5-day forecast. Our competition started doing a 7-day forecast. So she had the light bulb go off and say, hey, we're Storm Team 8. Why don't we do an 8-day forecast? And we're you could hear a pin drop in the tracking center. We're like, what?
Our global models are 80% accurate at 7 to 8 days. Just that by itself shows the increase in skill.
I feel like we can see when there's going to be intense weather, like 5 days out, which is bananas if you think about it. Like 5 days out, we know that you might see a violent tornado, or 5 days out, you might see a big blizzard. That's a pretty cool advancement in technology.
We're starting off at a better place with the model data, but the finished product is still forecasters developing it into a forecast.
One person who has witnessed these advancements through the years firsthand is our own Chief Meteorologist Emeritus Bill Steffen.
Bill marks 50 years of forecasting here in West Michigan this fall. While you won't see him much on the air nowadays, his legacy remains.
I just think that for West Michigan, some of these big weather events are probably just as memorable as like Bill is.
I thought that after doing this for 50 years, there would be some burnout factor. But I am just as excited about watching a storm come in or a blizzard develop. I can't go to sleep at night.
Bill Steffen came to my 3rd grade class, and he did a weather presentation. I'll never forget, he showed the twin tornadoes of the Palm Sunday outbreak of Elkhart, Indiana. I was like, oh, just fixated. And I mean, never in my wildest dream did I think I would end up working side by side with, my idols, Craig and Bill.
Bill connected with people. Bill opened himself up to be able to receive folks, in a public setting like that. That's not always the easiest. He was a natural at that. I mean, everything from the school talks to the parades to going out in the community.
He absolutely loves talking about weather. It is his favorite subject. He talks about it, he blogs about it. I mean, absolutely his favorite thing. And to this minute, he hasn't been on the air in a little while, but it's still, it revolves around everything that he does.
I think that people know Bill and remember him because he made such an investment in the community. And I think it's an honor as a broadcast meteorologist to be in people's homes and to walk through some of these events because goodness knows Michigan delivers a lot.
That's all the time we have for tonight.
Over the last 30 minutes, we've shown you 3 of the most impactful weather events West Michigan has ever seen.
Storm Teammates' commitment to keeping you safe and informed is the same now as it was then. We're always tracking and always alerting you before the next storm hits.
You can stay in touch with Bill by reading his blog and with us at woodtv.com.